Hey everyone, this is Schleicher, and I am your game sage trying to impart a little gaming wisdom to everyone. And I'm here today with someone who I'm very excited about. This is Emil Larson, and he is currently kickstarting Rogue Angels out on Kickstarter now. And he has set this in the world of Burning Suns. And Burning Suns, that was your first game, right, Emil?
Hi Keith. Yeah, that was my first game back in. I kickstarted it in 2013, so 10 years ago.
Oh, wow. And I know that there were, some struggles with it, but I
hmm
think it eventually helped you to become a better uh, crowdfunder, and you had a successful campaign with Burning Rome afterwards, right?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's correct. And in the end, I managed to deliver on Burning Suns, even though it took 2 or 3 more years than expected. So it was, I think, in 17, I managed to put out the Suns, and then yeah, I had Burning Rome in 18, I think, and that went pretty straightforward.
Hmm.
Much smaller game, and yeah, now I'm back here 10 years later with something huge.
Yeah, Angels. So it's set in the same universe as your Burning Suns game. Can you tell me a little bit about Burning Suns and why you decided to set Rogue Angels in that universe?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, we when I set out to do the first strategy game, I've always been a big sci-fi fan, so I wanted something in space-ish when I wanted to do my war game, and I started creating that with some illustrators who I was ping-ponging a lot with them about how it should look, how it should feel, and all that stuff, and managed to create some different species that we use in the game, right? And I think after I also got an author in to write books, and we published 4 books digitally and on Amazon. It kind of seemed like there was enough to dive in and actually take this other Rogue Angels game idea and put it in that universe as well. So I found a point where I kind of like um, sat down and said, okay, I want it to be from here on because the other game takes place in this time frame, and now I want to do something in this time frame and kind of expand upon it. So yeah.
And one of the interesting features about Burning Suns was the fact that you could kind of create your own race with different panels, right?
Yeah, I wanted to give a lot of opportunities to mix these you mixed species with ideologies and kind of got an empire structure that you could try to conquer the galaxy with. And I have always found it quite intriguing to be able to mix things up and have different varieties of gameplay and win conditions. And so yeah, that was the initial idea behind it. Yeah.
So now with Rogue Angels, this is more of I guess a sci-fi crawler. It's not a dungeon crawler per se, but you
Mm,
have quite a few different elements of a dungeon crawler in there.
mhm.
But then there seems like there's a lot more to it than that, with the like interacting with objects. Why did you decide to have people need to interact with things? Is it kind of to simulate the stress of the situation, trying to get a door open or get a console to work?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with that I'm influenced by computer games in general. Like
Hmm.
I'm not so much influenced by dungeon crawlers. I played a few, but it's for the average designer, it's probably much fewer than it should be. But um, the thing is, I was very intrigued by how Mass Effect managed to balance the computer game Mass Effect managed to balance between RPG and shooter. And the whole idea about doing something that is interesting and challenging, but make sure that you don't dive too deep into nitty-gritty details. And it just always seems fascinating to me because it makes for such an accessible game, and also much more, or usually more fun, more engaging. And something like you touched on this with interacting, is that I wanted it to be more than hack and slash, because I've seen that in so many other games, like Imperial Assault and Gloomhaven and stuff like that, where you kind of like, you just go and you fight somebody, and then you move on to the next and you fight somebody. And sometimes there is like a small objective of, oh, get to this point. But it's just, once you've done that, you've done it all. And I really like the idea of having, like I said before, about this variety. Have variety not here in terms of strategy, but variety in terms of tactics, and variety in terms of mission. So missions often have different ways to be achieved, and you can do that by deploying different types of tactics. So that's just fascinating to work with, that breadth of different elements you can put together.
Yeah, and I did notice too that depending on how the outcome of the mission went, it could influence how different races and factions viewed your characters later on in the game.
Yeah, and that's something that is really rewarding. That once you've completed a mission, you've sat down and you've spent an hour or 1.5 hours on playing something, then you are rewarded by the game acknowledging that you did it in your way. And that's why I want different outcomes, and I have this whole fail forward attitude towards my game, is that once you've played the first mission and you go on, and from the first or second segment, once you go into a mission and you kind of get started, you always fail forward, because now the game acknowledge that maybe you didn't perform as well, or you did something else, and the NPCs will react to that, and your mission parameters might change, or something else might change. And that's I think that's very important.
Yeah, and you give every single character cards to kind of show how their influence is with not only other races, but other characters within the game itself too. And these are all like removable stickers as well, so that you can replay the game, so you can try different things later on, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, the game is meant to, you take one character through their entire hero's journey and the whole team's effort to, save the galaxy or do what they need to do, right? In some sense. But you can switch it out if you want, and you can have characters die if you accept that. Otherwise, you can just kind of like not paint it, or not put the sticker. That's up to you. I'm not going to judge you. But you can have other characters come back, or you can have new characters come in, and it just gives a lot of room for exploration of both yourself as a player, but also of the characters you're presented with, and what way you want to take them. Like, how do you watch, or how do you perceive their moral compass?
Yeah, and I like the fact that you do try to mix things up as far as objectives, and also that like you get through a portion of the mission and then you don't have to tear everything down and get out a bunch of new tiles or anything. You have a single map that you play with, and then it kind of evolves as the mission goes forward.
Yeah. I like to have I like there to be progression in such a game. Like in a narrative, you should not be able to see too far ahead. I've played games where you put out all the bad guys, everything, and then you kind of play until all the bad guys are dead. And then that's it. And I like things to evolve. I like things to be like, okay, we have to take something into consideration. We're not sure when this mission is over because we don't know exactly how the enemies are going to react. And all these things play into the human element of, curiosity and exploration, and how you try to prepare yourself. How risk adverse are you? Like, how much do you want to, just jump in and do something, and how much do you stay back? And that is reflected in the personality traits and the personality diagram that I've also given the characters, so that it's more than just players thinking that that's how they're going to act like, or everything is interpreted on this map from how they are, attacking the mission or attacking the problem at hand, right?
Yeah, and while there is, there are objectives to each mission, and I do like the fact that when you do have combat missions, it goes very quickly. There isn't like okay, let's roll this dice and see how many hits you get, and then roll this dice and see how many defense the other player has. It goes very quickly and very smoothly, and then you have your deck of cards that tells you how your enemies react depending on their position um, or like how much damage someone else has or proximity to another player. That must have taken quite a bit of thought to do something like this. And while there is a die roll, it doesn't like change things very abruptly that it slows down the game. It still plays at a very brisk pace.
The enemy AI took a long time to adjust and get right. I kind of had an idea of where I wanted to go with it, but it was hard to adjust it so it felt like the enemies were a threat and not completely overwhelming the players as well, right? So there was this balance that needed to be struck. But early on, I was quite clear on in my design about that I wanted the enemies to be and feel like real combatants. So like my military background might have influenced me here, but the thing is that when you're in a firefight, you behave differently depending on how the firefight goes. So if you're in the offensive or if you're in the defense, you act according to that. So I really wanted the enemies to feel like they had a goal themselves and a behavior that matched that goal or that sense of situation they were in. So if you ambush the enemies, then they are in chaos. If they ambush you, then they do more damage. They can, they can hit more targets because they are waiting for you, right? So, and I feel that is much deeper and more engaging than having, okay, this is a ranged unit, so they just shoot from afar. This is a, whatever it might be. So I thought it was stronger to, instead of putting behavior on specific enemies, then put behavior in a context and be like, this is how all enemies can behave like this, and this is the enemy that I will apply to in this situation where I have this set up for this mission. So, and then they can change during a mission, right? So a behavior can change if suddenly the enemies are now outnumbered. So now they are withdrawing instead of being on the offensive, for example.
So one thing that I found that was very interesting was your damage system and the fact that everything is pretty much based on the cards that each player gets, and each player gets a very different set of cards to kind of specialize them a little bit, it seems. but I'm guessing that there's opportunity for them to get more cards to maybe expand or get better abilities. But I really like how the game is driven by the cards to kind of help players limit their choices of what they can do during their turn, so that they don't have to try to think, okay, I need to, do this and do this, or should I do this and this. The cards really help drive the movement forward.
Yeah, the cooldown mechanic, like, is. I was initially inspired by League of Legends and other similar games where you can easily see that people perform their different abilities, and you can see the cooldown. Like, the cooldown of abilities in Dota or League of Legends are so important. Like, and I was fascinated by how could I translate that into a board game. Like, how could I make that these special moves were actually something that was tangible and easy to understand in terms of cooldown? Because, of course, in a computer game, you can do whatever because you just have the computer count everything. So how could I implement that in a way that made sense? Because if you just fired your big sniper rifle, then maybe you needed to reload it, and therefore it would take some time, or, in this concept. And the same with abilities of different sort. And so I quickly came up with just this conveyor belt kind of idea of having the cooldown track below the characters. And it was in the very first prototype I did, and I had an idea, okay, that this ability should just have different cooldowns, and you should be able to play them on this track. And then the natural progression from there was, well, if a track has been taken or a slot has been taken, then you need to play it higher, because you have to have this dilemma of, how should I perform this one in order to get my cards back as fast as possible and in the way that I want them back, so that I can use the things I need afterwards. So, and I don't remember when, but it was a very natural, and I think also in the early development, natural progression, that I put damage on the same track. Because I've always been a bit. Some games it works very well to have health meters, just 0 to 100.
Right.
If you hit 0, you're dead. It's all good, and it works. But here, I didn't see it as a fun way of interpreting health, and I didn't want health to actually be the health itself should not be the consideration. Your wound and what it does to you should be your consideration. So if you have a broken arm, then that is a consideration, but different from if you have a broken leg, or if you have a concussion. So you would act accordingly, and depending on what happens to you, you would also be hampered in a way that matched that. So if you break a leg, you can still operate your weapon at almost at 100% efficiency, but you would not be able to move. You would not be able to move as fast, right? So that idea I wanted in the game, because it resonated with what I wanted to do with my cooldown of you having performed something and now you had to rest. So, and if you got shot by the enemies, you should rest in some way. So staying out of combat would help you, but also that wounds were not it was a natural part of the combat and not a percentage game. So you wouldn't be like a wound that lands on slot 4, 3 or 4 or something high up the track can be just as detrimental now in the beginning of a mission as it can be in the end of a mission. It all depends on what you're trying to do, because otherwise health is often used just as a second resource. Like if you play Hearthstone or
Mhm.
Magic, health is
Right.
something you can use as leverage in order to achieve your goal. And I didn't want that in the game. I didn't want it to be a sort of leverage. I want it to be a here and present thing. It's dangerous to get wounds, but it's part of the combat, and you just have to outsmart or outthink your situation with whatever wounds you have.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more tactics involved when you get injured. And so you have to think about, are you going to risk getting injured or for that, last kill shot, or are you going to just kind of hang back and if you are injured, possibly rest to get through the injury that you have? Because it's definitely not like, oh, I'm at 50% health, I can still do everything. I just don't have as much health as what I normally would. And that's, yeah, you're right. That a lot of games take that kind of mentality to it. And this really, it makes it a little bit deeper. Makes you think about what you're going to do and if that's the right decision to make. And if, you do get injured, that could linger for quite a while. Now you will eventually heal, but it still is going to take some time because of how that track goes with your injuries as well as your abilities that are on there. And I like the fact too that with the cooldown, if you play two cards that are both at a 2, you have to put the second one that you play on the 3, one to the right, and then it's like, well, which one do I do first? Is this going to affect what I'm going to be able to do later on in the game? And it really adds quite a bit of strategy to the game. And I as fast as the combat is, you still have to think about what you're doing and how you're going to approach things. I remember when I was playing with my friends, one of our players got injured, and so the other two of us who were there kind of went to surround him so that he couldn't get hit by the other enemies that were on the board. And we were able to like defeat the enemies that way. But it really was like, okay, we have to make sure that he can rest and get his healing down, so and then we can protect him so that he won't get shot at.
Yeah, yeah, and that is a very good point, and very much to the exactly what I want people to experience is that there is a very real consequence to how they decide to play this out, because you could also have left your friend and be like, okay, you will just have to suck it up and then we will be back here, right? And then the consequences would have been different. And I like that that idea that you get very invested in what the other players are doing. You're not just sitting and keeping your cards and like, I will play this and then I will play this, and you have no say in that. You're very much trying to optimize at the table. But that was something I first discovered once I had other people play it, and I kind of at one point realized that there was so much table talk. And I was like, that's pretty cool. Like, even people who are like, okay, I will just be standing here back here and I will take a few shots at the enemies and stuff, they were just as much engaging in like, oh, okay, then if you do this and this, then we can make sure the enemies go this way. And like, you're very involved in the other player's turn. And while of course there is downtime in the game, the downtime feels different when you are also invested in the other player's turns.
Yeah, there's definitely a feeling that you're involved no matter who's up and which enemy is up, but it's still, now granted, these are the intro scenarios, but I still felt like combat went very quickly because there wasn't like a ton of dice rolling and a ton of things that you had to like figure out. It's like, okay, he has shields. Okay, he does 3 hits, so he has 1 shield, so he takes 2 damage. And okay, we roll the dice, and okay, we can add a +1 or +2 to this, and or we can move an extra space during that turn. There's a lot less downtime than I feel like if you're rolling something and seeing, okay, do I have the ability to do this, and do I have the range for this? And things are very much much straightforward, but it doesn't detract from the game at all. And I like the dials that are going to be coming out with the full version of the game, because that is a great way to keep track of everything. I mean, it wasn't bad with the prototype at all, but being able to see the numbers as far as like the health of the enemy right there, and then also be like, okay, this is enemy number 1, this is enemy number 2, that really I'm looking forward to see what that looks like in the end, because I think it's going to have a really solid table presence as well.
I hope so too, yeah. I'm also looking forward to see a real physical non-prototype copy. Renders are nice and all, but it will be good to see some properly die-cut cardboard with artwork and stuff. That's going to be amazing.
Why did you decide to go with these dials? I know that like with Burning Suns, you had the dice that went into the ships, so which was a very cool mechanic there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure you can't put dice on the on the figures themselves, but having putting the dials on there is a nice touch.
Well, apparently I always seem to end up trying to find a clever way to do a few things, and somebody might judge me for not being that clever. We'll see how it all turns out, of course, but the idea of having all the data where the enemy is, that's kind of like, that's why it's a standee, it's a cardboard standee when it's the enemies and they have their data on, because then you just have to look at the enemy, you have your behavior card, and you'll be like, it will do like this. And then I wanted it to be tracked in a way that would keep the amount of components to a minimum. So, and it could be done with some sort of chips as well. So there is, of course, that, but there needed to be this initiative on each of the enemies. And the initiative does not have anything to do with the enemy itself. The initiative is on the base. So you place the enemy in the base. Now you have an enemy with an initiative. So it was important for me that those could be separated, so that I could suddenly make some enemies do something in a certain way and be more aggressive or less aggressive than other enemies. So I needed full control over the data that I was going to put into the enemies, so that I could present players with proper scaled difficulty and a certain type of agency, right, towards the enemies. So, and having the track also, while of course putting the initiative on, also indicate how much health it is, so you could just turn it and then you would have how much health it has left after you've been shooting at it. I just thought that was the most straightforward way to go about it. So yeah, I had a 3D model developed for how a plastic base could incorporate some cardboard dials to make sure that they could shift around. So that's what we're going to test, later on, how it will manifest itself in physical form, because 3D is one thing,
right?
Physical testing is something else.
Yeah. So, about how many missions is a typical playthrough going to be about, do you think?
If you're sitting like you're talking about a full campaign?
Yes, the full campaign.
And this is still a bit of an estimate, because I have written the first half of the campaign, first half of the campaign, and the first half of all the missions. So, and the first half is roughly 43. It will end on 47 or something missions. But that's the first half, and you will have to go through 22 or so of them in order to go from chapter 1 to chapter 4, and then 4, 5, 6 will be the last half, and they will be roughly the same. So 80 available missions with 40 missions you have to travel through in order to get to a conclusion for the team.
So, and there, it sounds like there's going to be quite a bit of replayability there then, if you're only going through half of the missions, but I'm sure that part of that will be determined by the actions that you take during the game as well, and what kind of results you get as well.
Yeah. One thing that I've been very very focused on, like I set up 2 goals for this game when I didn't know what I was going to call the game or anything. I just knew there were 2 things I wanted to do in my game. I wanted to do a physical interpretation of Mass Effect. How would it look as a board game? And I knew I could do it in my Burning Suns universe, but I wanted to imagine, like, how would it actually look if you took the Mass Effect computer game and put it in a board game setting. And the second goal, and I think I achieved the first one, at least also, from what reviewers say, very much so. The second goal is that I want to make people cry. And I'm not meaning that it is, I don't need them to cry. It's not so much that, but the idea is that I need to put enough emotional attachment and enough agency and enough involvement, player involvement into the characters, that if you get the character killed or get an NPC killed, that you were somehow having on your trip or whatever, that you would get a bit emotional about it, that people could be enough invested in what is being told, how they are living out the character's personality and their judgment, and together or as a solo, that's all good, but kind of like that experience it would take could get as close to somebody that they might cry if that was a goal, because I think it's a very, very, very high standard for a board game, because you don't have the element of surprise. So yeah.
Well, I'm very impressed with the playthrough that I did with Rogue Angels, and I'm glad to see that it's already past funding by a significant amount, and I'm very excited to see what else will be coming out, not just as far as stretch goals, but in the future of what games you might be coming out and designing. So I'm really happy that you took the time out to talk with me about this, and I'm,
of course,
yeah, like I said, I'm very excited. I really think that this game brings a lot of unique ideas to the board game space that other companies could definitely learn from, and I really am happy to be able to get a sneak preview at it, and I can't wait to see what the final product looks like.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you.
So, well, thank you very much for your time, and we will keep in touch with how things go with the rest of the campaign.
For sure. That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.